Can you imagine the mind of a serial killer? These sadistic monsters are all of us' worst nightmares. They kill people indiscriminately over time, between each act. They delight in inflicting pain on others and feel an insatiable need to satisfy their morbid desires. Serial killers are mentally ill, with traits of schizophrenia, a personality disorder. But beware, most people with mental illness are not capable of committing such inhumane acts. The FBI formally defines a serial murder as a series of 3 or more murders with common features that suggest a possibility that the crimes were committed by the same actor or actors. Serial killers are lunatics who prefer to savor each victim one at a time. If you want to shiver and feel terror running through your veins, you can't miss this video. In it, we're going to talk about the top 10 serial killers of all time. Find out how these monsters terrorize the world and how they managed to evade justice for so long. In 10th place, Tsutomu Miyazaki. The Dracula. The story begins with your birth. He was premature and his hands were deformed, which left him vulnerable to bullying at school and hurt his academic performance. His shattered self-esteem and difficulty socializing led him down a dark path. Between 1988 and 1989, he kidnapped and murdered 4 girls, all between the ages of 4 and 7. Known by the nicknames Little Girl Killer and Dracula, Tsutomu Miyazaki was known for his sadistic violence and the pleasure he seemed to take in further traumatizing the victims' families. It started with silent phone calls but soon escalated to sending bones, teeth and pictures of the girls, accompanied by chilling postcards like the one that read, "Mari. Cremated. Bone. Investigate. Prove it." Tsutomu Miyazaki wasn't content with just killing his victims, he also dabbled in necrophilia, drinking the blood of one and even eating a part of another's hand. His cruelty only ended when he was finally arrested while trying to molest a girl in a park. Surprisingly, even after his capture, he appeared calm and collected. Tsutomu Miyazaki was sentenced to death by hanging on June 17, 2008. His story is a wake-up call to the dangers of intimidation and social marginalization, as well as the human potential for cruelty and violence. Get ready to dive into the darkest and most disturbing mystery in crime history. In 9th place we have Jack the Ripper, is a legendary serial killer who left a trail of blood and terror through the streets of Whitechapel, London, during the terrible year of 1888. With an estimated number of victims around 5, he is the most infamous serial killer of all time. But what makes Jack so devilishly fascinating is the fact that he was never identified or captured. He was a master at masking his identity and fooling even the fabled Scotland Yard. The mystery surrounding his true identity persists to this day, leaving an indelible mark on the criminal world. Jack was meticulous and strategic in his attacks, targeting female sex workers who lived in poor and poorly patrolled areas. He took advantage of these women's vulnerability and savagely attacked them, leaving a trail of mutilated and grotesque corpses. And if you think that's all there is to it, prepare to get goosebumps. The most brutal murder of all was that of Mary Jane Kelly. His body was found in an unimaginably mutilated state. Her face was cut open, her intestines were removed and placed under her head, and her breasts were cut out. And the heart? Well, her heart just disappeared from the crime scene. The mystery of Jack the Ripper continues to intrigue and terrify the entire world. Its macabre legacy remains a grim reminder of human cruelty. If you dare, come and discover the hidden secrets of one of the most notorious killers of all time. In octave we have Edward Theodore Gain the Butcher. Edward Theodore Gain, better known as the Butcher of Plainfield, was known for his brutal escalation of violence. Not only did he confess to murdering Mary Hogan in 1954 and Bernice Wardens in 1957, he also exhumed corpses from local cemeteries to make artifacts from the bones and skin. His home was a veritable macabre shrine, filled with bizarre items that shocked the police. When authorities entered his home, they found Warden's decapitated body hanging upside down by his legs, with all of his internal organs removed. The scene was so gruesome that many of the officers found it difficult to continue working. In addition, there were bowls made from human skulls, masks made from the skin of heads, fingernails, and other disturbing remains. All this led to the conclusion that Gaines suffered from serious mental disorders. Gaines was deemed mentally unstable and sent to a mental asylum, where he spent the remainder of his days. He died on July 26, 1984, a victim of respiratory and heart failure caused by cancer. The Plainfield Butcher left a dark and macabre legacy, and is remembered to this day as one of the most disturbing and brutal serial killers of all time. 7th place goes to Richard Ramirez. Get ready to hear the shocking story of one of the most sadistic and vicious killers in American history, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He mercilessly killed and tortured countless victims, spreading terror wherever he went. Ramirez, a drug addict with a fascination with Satanism, walked a dark path that led to the brutal murder of 14 people and the torture of dozens more. His unquenchable thirst for violence and blood was fueled by his Vietnam veteran cousin, who exposed him to gruesome images of dead women. At age 13, Ramirez witnessed the murder of his cousin's wife and has since become obsessed with violence. For 14 months, he wreaked terror across California, brutally murdering and raping his helpless victims. In one of the most brutal cases, Ramirez killed Vincent Zazera and his wife Maxine. He shot Vincent and then beat Maxine to death, before gouging out her eyes. The killer felt no remorse for what he was doing and continued to terrorize the population until his capture in 1985. Ramirez faced justice, but his death sentence by gas chamber was not fully carried out. In 2013, he died of cancer on death row. His story of violence and cruelty is a wake-up call to the evil that can dwell within each of us. Always be aware, for evil may be closer than you think. 6th, The Milwaukee Cannibal, a terrible story of evil and violence. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer is one of the most infamous serial killers in U.S. history. He is known as the Cannibal of Milwaukee, and was known for his terrible acts that shook the country between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer was responsible for taking the lives of 17 men and boys, all victims of his sick and sadistic fantasies. Dahmer's story begins in the summer of 1978, when he kills his first victim, Stephen Mark Hicks, a teenage hitchhiker. Dahmer took him to his home, where he strangled him to death. This was just the first of a series of gruesome deaths that Dahmer would commit over the next few years. Over time, Dahmer became obsessed with the idea of dismembering their bodies and keeping their parts as trophies. He also indulged in necrophilia and cannibalism, eating body parts of his victims. When police raided his home in 1991, they found 3 heads and body parts in the fridge, confirming the police's and community's dire suspicions. Dahmer also attempted to convert his victims into zombies, one of the scariest facets of his unhealthy obsession. He used sleeping pills and even poured boiling water and acid over his victims' skulls, all in an attempt to turn them into his zombie slaves. But Dahmer's career of heinous crimes came to an abrupt end in 1991 when he was finally arrested by the police. However, justice was short-lived for his victims, who had their lives cut short for his wicked actions. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer received his final justice when he was brutally murdered in prison by a cellmate. He was bludgeoned to death with a metal bar, a violent end to one of the most despicable murderers in U.S. history. Jeffrey Dahmer's story is a terrifying reminder of the evil that can lurk in society's shadows, a chilling example of how evil and violence can manifest in a man's mind. Dahmer's victims will never be forgotten, and their story will continue to be a warning for generations to come.
Don't forget to like our video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments, ideas, and suggestions for the next video.
In fifth, we have Charmoso. Theodore Robert Bundy, also known as the Charming Serial Killer, was an American criminal who terrorized the nation with his brutal and merciless killing of over 30 young women. Bundy started his murder spree in 1974, luring his victims in with his attractive looks and ability to fake injuries to elicit their sympathy. With a charismatic and manipulative personality, Bundy tricked them into his car and took them to isolated places, where he then attacked, killed, and even violated their decomposing corpses. During his trial, Bundy became a celebrity because of his looks and intelligence, which he used to try to evade justice for years. However, even with all his charm, he couldn't avoid the inevitable. On January 24, 1989, Bundy finally faced punishment for his heinous crimes and was executed by electrocution. His death ended the life of one of the most vicious killers in American history, but left a legacy of horror and suffering for his victims and their families.
The murderous clown ranked fourth. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who terrified Cook County with his bloodlust. With a smile on his face and clown makeup, John Wayne Gacy was a child entertainer by day, but behind that guise was a serial killer and rapist who left a trail of death and terror in his wake. Over the course of 6 years, between 1972 and 1978, Gacy brutally murdered at least 33 teenagers and youths, most of them between the ages of 14 and 21, in Cook County, Illinois. He would lure them into his home with the promise of work on construction sites, then sexually abuse and strangle his victims. The killer often referred to himself as Pogo the Clown, a sadistic alter ego who embodied his darkest desires. Gacy's methods were brutal and sadistic. He raped, tortured, and killed his victims with his bare hands or with a rope. He would then bury their bodies under his house or dump them in a nearby river. The murders were only discovered in 1978, when one of the young men managed to escape and informed the police about what was happening at Gacy's house. Gacy's story is scary and fascinating at the same time. The serial killer was a complex figure who suffered from mental disorders and was a victim of childhood abuse. He worked as a manager for a fast food chain in the 1960s and got involved in social activities where he dressed up as a clown to entertain children. But behind the appearance of an ordinary, cheerful man, there was a psychopath looking for his next victim. Gacy was arrested in 1968 for sexual assault, but police didn't discover the true extent of his crimes until 10 years later, when they found 27 bodies buried under his home. Gacy was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in 1994, but his story continues to fascinate and haunt people across the world. His legacy is a grim reminder of how evil can lurk beneath the veneers of goodness and joy, and how the pursuit of power and control can lead to heinous and inhumane acts.
Now things start to get a little more tense with these 3 last serial killers. The Zodiac Killer in third place. The Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California during the 1960s, leaving at least 5 confirmed victims in its deadly wake. But the true extent of their cruelty is even more horrifying, with investigators believing the death toll could reach a staggering 37. The killer's first attack took place in December 1968, when David Faraday and his girlfriend Betty Lou Jensen were shot dead while in their car. No clear motive for the deaths was found and police were unable to identify the suspect. The killer called himself Zodiac, in reference to his disturbing practice of sending encrypted messages to the police and media. And after more than 50 years of evasion, one of these riddles was finally cracked in 2020. The cryptic message read, "I hope you're having a lot of fun trying to get me that it wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber, because it's going to send me to Paradicate as soon as possible, because now I have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be easy in parachute death." The police were able to produce a sketch of the killer based on eyewitness accounts, but he escaped capture and his identity remains a mystery to this day. His skill at avoiding justice is unsettling, and leaves people wondering if he might still be out there, waiting to strike again.
In second place we have the sorcerer. Get ready to hear the chilling story of one of Indonesia's most terrifying serial killers, Ahmad Suraji, aka the Sorcerer. He terrorized the country between 1986 and 1997, brutally killing 42 defenseless young girls and drinking their saliva to become a mystical healer. Suraji claimed that his father told him in a dream that drinking the saliva of 70 dead girls would transform him into a powerful shaman. With that in mind, he began murdering girls and women, claiming that many of them were looking to him for wealth and beauty. He would take them to a cane field and bury them up to their waists, making them believe that this was part of the ritual. Then the killer would strangle his victims and drink their saliva, believing this would give him mystical powers. To further increase his strength, he would bury the bodies with their heads facing his house. He claimed this would allow him to absorb the victim's energy. Suraji presented himself as a mystical healer to the population, but his actions were pure evil and perversion. He was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad on July 10, 2008. His story is a wake-up call to the evil that can lurk behind a seemingly harmless facade. Stay tuned, as danger may be closer than you think. Now Aki gets sinister, with over 200 kills under his belt, which puts him at number 1 on our list. Harold Frederick Shipman, also known as Dr. Death and the Angel of Death, is one of the UK's most notorious criminals. He was convicted of killing over 218 patients, and it is speculated that the actual number of his victims could be as high as 250. This British doctor not only violated his position of trust, he manipulated his patients' will so that he could inherit their money before injecting them with lethal doses of painkillers. Locals were already concerned about the death rate of Shipman's patients, but the police found nothing suspicious against him until the death of Kathleen Grundy, an 81-year-old wealthy widow. The autopsy revealed that she had been murdered by an overdose of morphine, and so the truth about Shipman's crimes came to light. He was arrested, tried and convicted, becoming the only British doctor to be found guilty of killing patients. While imprisoned, Shipman hanged himself in his prison cell on January 13, 2004. His shocking story of abuse of power and manipulation left the world shaken and serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of blind trust.